I'm sure by this point you've heard all about the deep net. It's been talked about more and more in relation to places like Silk Road and child pornography rings all over the world. I've even heard about a website where people were able to buy and sell children. Despite all of these dark secrets lurking in the recesses of the internet, nothing could have prepared me for MartyrNet. If you were to ask me where I first heard about it, I could not give you a coherent answer. It's like bits and pieces of its existence started reaching me over the years. Even from the fragments of knowledge I had about it, I could tell it was not a place that I was even remotely fucked up enough to venture into. Unfortunately, I wound up falling for a girl who was fated to lead me right down the rabbit hole. Her name was Amanda, and we were taking Statistics 120 together every Thursday night. I'm normally really bad at approaching girls, but when she introduced herself as a Sedona native, I jumped at the chance to make fun of the vortex that so many Sidonians believed in. "So, how many aliens have you seen?" I asked. A few other people around the class looked at me like I was stupid, but I could tell that Amanda got it. She just smiled back at me and said, 3, actually. After sitting together through a few more classes, we finally decided to hang out outside of school. She invited me back to her place, and we smoked some weed and listened to some folky Pandora stations. It wasn't until a few shots of tequila got thrown into the mix that things started to heat up. I had just gotten her top off when she suddenly looked at me weird, like she had just remembered something. "I shouldn't," she said, quietly. "I think you really like me." "What gave you that idea?" "It would just be meaningless for me," she said. That hurt, honestly. As down as I am for meaningless sex, I was a little too enamored by her to just let something like that bounce off me. I don't know if it was just the situation or the added shots of tequila and pot, but I was at a loss for words. It was like she had just shut off. Awkwardly, I rolled off her bed and got dressed and showed myself out. The next week, she never showed up to class. It wasn't until then that I really tried calling her up and getting a hold of her, but she wouldn't answer my calls, and she wasn't responding to me on Facebook. After another week went by, I got desperate and drove out to her apartment. The front door was unlocked, but no one was inside. I was on the verge of calling the police, but I figured maybe I should look around a little more. Shamelessly, I opened up her laptop and looked around. That was where I found the torrent download for the program, MartyrNet. She had already installed it and had a window minimized. When I clicked the shortcut, it brought up a chat log between her and a few other users in a private conversation. They had been talking about prices. Apparently, the 3 other users had agreed to pay her $20,000 for something. I felt suddenly sick to my stomach. Was it for sex? Was she a prostitute or something? Desperately, I scrolled up to find out more information, but the last thing I saw was a date before I heard the door slam shut. "Hello?" came her familiar voice. "Is someone here?" It's me," I said, figuring I ought to just get it over with. "What the fuck, Leo? I was worried about you." Well, don't. You don't even know me. What makes you think you can just come into my house like this?" I apologized again and again, but she wasn't calming down. Even in her anger, I could tell there was something very different about her. She had deep bags under her eyes, and she looked paler than usual. On her head, she had tied a purple bandana, covering up her already thin hair. Just get the hell out of here, and don't come here again. You were just a thing, an accident." I pretended not to be hurt by that, and closed the door behind me on my way out. All I could think about on the drive home was how sickly she looked. Had she always been that way, and I never noticed? What was she getting into? It was almost impossible to concentrate in class for the following few days. I hadn't known Amanda for that long, but I felt compelled to know what was going on. I couldn't just forget about everything. So on Monday afternoon, I downloaded the MartyrNet client and acquainted myself with the program. It's fairly easy to navigate. There's only 5 servers, alpha, beta, etc. I flipped through a few of them, but nothing was going on. Only on the Delta server did I see a small chat bar with 4 users, 2 of which had prices beside their names. Apparently, all of the servers are free to watch, as long as the shows have been paid for by someone. In Delta server at that time, there was a girl with tribal tattoos sticking all kinds of miscellaneous objects inside of her. Anything the paying users called out, she would somehow conjure from outside the screen. I was getting more and more nervous as the day wore on. By the time 3 a.m. rolled around, there were at least 20 users in the chat room. At the top of the chat bar were the 3 paying users I had seen on Amanda's computer, each sharing portions of the $20,000. Suddenly, the black screen lit up, and I was looking at her beautiful green eyes. She looked even worse than when I had seen her. Was she sick? "Hi everyone," she said, forcing a smile. "I guess word got around, and I haven't seen a server this full since that one girl painted a portrait of herself naked, using her own shit as a medium." The chat bar started filling up with people's reactions and side conversations about the shit show. Amanda just sat there, motionless, reading what they all had to say. So far, I was relieved to see that she wasn't naked, although she wasn't fully dressed either. She was wearing the same turquoise panties and bra that I had seen the last night I spent with her. Even though she was emaciated, she still looked beautiful, in a haunting kind of way. "I guess there's not much more to say." Her voice sounded restricted, like it kept getting caught in her throat. "Thank you guys for offering me so much. My family really needs it after all of the medical bills they've had to come pay because of me. They'll be confused at first, but it will all work out somehow." In the chat bar, a few people were placing bets on something. It was apparently something they knew about the show that I didn't, because they kept making bets on random numbers. "I'll bet you 50 she can't make it past 3, said one user. "Look how sick she is. She won't go beyond 2. And on the betting went. I saw Amanda's eyes rove over the conversation, and her face turned a paler kind of green color. She tried to smile, but all she managed was to make her lip tremble. She was absolutely shaking, and so was I. What was I about to see? "Okay," she croaked. She was crying now. A single tear welled up in the corner of her eye and ran down her cheek, and she waved to the monitor after wiping her nose. "Okay," she said again. Now her face was red, soaked in the tears that kept coming. "Enjoy the show." And she rolled back in her chair, further from the monitor. Suddenly I could see something silver in her hands. It was a kitchen knife, an absurdly large kitchen knife with a wooden handle. She took it into both of her hands and raised it with the tip pointed at her abdomen. She thrust it with a little grunt. She drove the knife into her abdomen, and when she removed it, the blood ran so thick it looked like it was an inky black. I thought the screen had gone blurry at first, but then I realized I was crying just as hard as she was. Yet she soldiered on. Everyone lost the bet. By the time her arm went limp and the knife had fallen to the floor, she had thrust it into her stomach 10 times. $20,000 for that, said one user. Some guy just had the most extreme climax of his life. I just sat there, numb, staring at her bleeding body, wondering if I should call the cops or an ambulance or something. But there was another feeling, one I couldn't as easily recognize within me. I had just watched someone die, right in front of my eyes. Though the tears kept coming, I couldn't help but feel suddenly very alive, sick, but alive. I waited a respectful 10 minutes or so before wiping my eyes dry. Everything was so numb and tingly and fucking alive. So, I flipped over to beta server to see what else was on. I met Eric when I was in college. We didn't meet at a bar, or a party, or in class, or any of the other plentiful social situations I was a part of at my sprawling state school. We met on the internet. It started on Omegle, not a place you go to meet a potential date, and that's definitely not what my intent was at the time. My friends and I had been messing about on it when we stumbled upon him. We started chatting, waiting for the inevitable show me your boobs moment when we would giggle and pretend to be a man or some other silly thing. But it never came. We were having a genuinely good conversation, and my friends soon got bored and went off to play video games or something more entertaining. But I was intrigued. Eric described himself as tall, not overly muscular but in shape, blonde, scraggly hair, and blue eyes. I pictured quite the young man who perhaps wasn't some loser in his mother's basement, and seeing as my classes and student organizations and job were consuming my life at the moment, it was nice to talk to a nice, albeit half-imagined, guy about interesting things. It seemed we talked for hours and we soon exchanged emails to continue our chatting. I gave him my throwaway email, the one I get all my junk mail routed to, just to be safe. As the days went by, I became quite attached to my new love interest. We had exchanged a couple pictures. He was almost as I had pictured him, quite good looking. We even added each other on Facebook. I noticed Eric's had been created a couple days before he added me, and didn't have but a few friends, including me. Even his few pictures were all the same ones he had sent me previously, but he explained that he'd never gotten into Facebook, so he made one just to keep in touch with me. I took that as a nice sentiment and carried on. As days turned into weeks, I started noticing stranger and stranger things about Eric. He would constantly post on my wall and started adding all my male friends and family on Facebook. He emailed me almost hourly, and when I didn't respond quickly enough, he expressed frustration and even got angry a couple times, writing things like, "I know you've read my emails. Email me back now, or we're in trouble." I started feeling uneasy, realizing Eric was taking this relationship way too seriously. He even asked me if I had been near other boys, and told me he would like me not to speak to anyone else of the male gender anymore. Yes, I had been flirting with other guys at this point, nothing serious, just the occasional teasing when I was hanging out with my male friends that I found attractive. I really didn't think Eric as my boyfriend, and though we had talked about being romantic with each other, I still assumed we were just friends. And anyway, he was several states away. I started ignoring more and more of his constant emails until finally I quit checking my throwaway account. After a few more days of him messaging me on Facebook every minute, I deleted him as a friend as well. I knew it was cruel, but when I tried to explain that we weren't as serious as he thought we were, he only got angry, so I decided to put an end to it. The afternoon I deleted him from my Facebook, I got a text. The number was blocked, and its only word was disappointed. I stared at it, my stomach clenching in that way it does when you know you're about to be in trouble. I knew right away it must be him. But how did he get my number? Was it posted on my Facebook? I checked. It wasn't there. I began to worry that he knew more about me than I thought he did. I became paranoid, glancing behind me constantly as I walked to class, declining party invitations, locking myself in my dorm room at night. My friends noticed my withdrawal, and one night insisted I go out with them. I reluctantly agreed, realizing I was probably overreacting. After all, I had received no more ominous messages from anyone in almost 2 weeks. My best friend Natalie helped me pick out an outfit, a very flattering little black dress that I hadn't worn in ages, and some red heels that a hooker would be proud to wear. I got dressed, did my makeup, and actually won the battle with my frizzy brown hair for once. I noticed that my once tight-fitting dress was quite loose on me, and wondered if I'd really lost so much weight. I'm a very petite girl, only 5'4", and maybe 120 pounds at the time, so for me, to lose weight wasn't very healthy at all. I asked Natalie if she'd noticed, and she seemed hesitant before saying yes. "We thought you were sick. You didn't notice those awful bags under your eyes? And your ribs are practically stabbing through your skin." I was shocked. I really hadn't noticed. I wasn't anorexic or anything. In fact, normally I would eat ridiculous amounts of food. I was previously lucky to have such a fast metabolism, but it dawned on me, as she said this, that I hadn't been hungry at all since that text. I'd managed to eat an occasional salad or cup noodle, but the usual diet of free pizza from student events and Chinese takeout was non-existent. Food had begun to become an obligation rather than something I enjoyed. That added to my complete lack of sleep and paranoia combined to make me look like death. I shook it off, however, and made sure my makeup covered my unsightly shadows before heading out for the night. We arrived at our regular watering hole dancing spot around 9. It wasn't very busy yet, but we wanted to beat the cover and get a head start on the night. We'd stopped for burritos on the way, so we decided to get a couple of drinks and relax until dancing picked up and our tummies settled. As we sat, crowded, watching and chatting, I started to zone out a bit. My friends' voices became fuzzy. My sight seemed to narrow and focus on a certain dark corner of the dance floor. I heard a sort of ringing in my ears, right before I saw him. He seemed to suddenly appear in my vision, leaning against the wall in that dark corner, glaring at me with a look of absolute contempt in his face. I felt that fuzzy feeling increase, even as my heart raced and adrenaline desperately tried to snap out of it. I saw a sadistic grin cross his lips as I blacked out. I woke up in a stark hospital room, Natalie slouched in a chair in the corner, apparently napping. My head felt like a million semi-trucks had run over it. I moaned and lay still for a moment, trying to gather myself and remember how I'd gotten here. Flashes very faintly came back of vomiting on the floor, screaming, and thrashing at my friends. "You had a seizure." I nearly jumped out of my skin, frantically looking around the room. Natalie was still asleep, snoring deeply. But at the foot of my bed stood a nurse. She wore a very traditional-looking nurse's uniform, complete with that funny hat with the red cross on it. I thought it odd, and shivering at the strange familiarity of her eyes, but my head hurt too much to think too far into it. "I've never had a seizure before," I told her, glancing at Natalie as I grew inexplicably nervous. "Yes, your friend there informed us. She's been at your side all night." I gave her some aspirin and told her to take a rest. She grinned uncannily at me. I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut against the harsh white light of the hospital room. Why did it happen? Because you were a very bad girl, she said, her voice changing in a way I didn't understand. It only hurt my head more, and I didn't open my eyes. "What?" I whispered, reaching up to massage my temples, but realizing I couldn't move my hands.
"You disappoint me, Anna. I don't like to be disappointed. You must be taught a lesson."
My eyes snapped open. There he stood, his eyes piercing into me, silencing my would-be screams. I looked back at Natalie. She wasn't snoring anymore. In fact, I couldn't see any movement from her at all. The ringing returned to my ears as I turned back to Eric. "Please, what do you want?" I whimpered, the sound of my own voice drowned out by the ringing in my ears.
"We're meant to be together,"
Eric told me, leaning down to kiss me. His lips burned on mine as if he was on fire. No, as if he was fire himself. I felt myself falling and falling and falling. I woke up in a Stark hospital bed, Natalie standing over me, desperately pressing the nurse call button over and over, looking like she saw a ghost. I was just relieved it was a dream. "Natalie, calm down. I'm okay," I mumbled, trying to sit up. My dream headache becoming a reality. I was just having a nightmare. What happened? "No, there was someone in here. I went to get coffee and I walked in, and some guy was kissing you." I felt all the color drain from my face. A wave of nausea swept over me, and I threw up over the side of my bed. Natalie cursed and ran to the door, yelling for a nurse. I felt myself blacking out again, the room swinging as my mind raced, and I tried to stabilize myself. Just before I closed my eyes again, I heard a faint whisper that sounded like it was right in my ear.
"I'll be keeping an eye on you."
That was a couple years ago. I have since graduated college, as hard as it was to catch my grades up after that ridiculous paranoia I've suffered since Eric. They never could figure out why I had the seizure. They came to the conclusion that it was caused by brain swelling from malnutrition and extreme stress. They put me on meds for a while, and I haven't had a problem since. I swear, I still see him around corners, in the shadows. Last night, I peeked out my window and saw a figure standing under a street lamp, just staring. I know it was him. I've gone to the police, but his emails go back to nowhere. They don't know who he is. I'm at the end of my rope. I bought a handgun. I've installed lock after lock. I've paid a fortune for the latest security system in my house, but I still don't feel safe. If I've learned anything, it's to stay away from the internet dating. I was pretty much raised on the internet. When I was in the first grade, my mom gave me my first email account. It was something similar to cute little nickname at AOL.com. I don't think I'll ever understand the reasoning behind an email address that age, considering the fact that I wasn't allowed on the internet, but hey, that was my mother. She probably wanted to grab it before anyone else, so it wouldn't be littered with numbers and underscores. When I was in the second grade, a Neopet caught my eye on the shelf at Walmart. I was never unreasonable with my requests, so my parents got it for me. When I got home, I was elated to find that my new little toy could be played with online. After much debate between my mom and dad, and a week's worth of good behavior, I was granted access to the World Wide Web for the first time in my life. My parents had 101 different locks and restrictions on my internet access. Looking back now, I wish they would have kept those restrictions. The actual bullying didn't start until I was in the 4th grade. Everyone had always treated me like I was different before, but no one had ever made it so glaringly obvious that I was different up until that point. Sure, they avoided me, and I spent a good chunk of my childhood in isolation, but the name-calling and teasing didn't pick up until then. Maybe things wouldn't have gotten so bad if my parents hadn't given in to my protests to ease up on my restrictions, but they didn't. I was able to persuade them to let me use the website's forums, and I got hooked. It started out innocently enough. I would answer polls about my favorite colors, and I would post under topics about what my school served for lunch that day. I had made a few friends and formed a little guild. Most of the members were friends from the forums that I had neo-mailed back and forth, but one user kind of showed up out of the blue. Their username was Panda778. I was pretty happy to have the extra member, so I didn't really mind. One day, after a particularly bad day at school, I posted a long, angry rant about how much I hated everyone around me at school. I was clicking around someone's profile when I saw that I had a message. It was from Panda778. I opened it up and found a list of ways to make me smile. I read through stuff like eat some cake and run as fast as you can, until I came to a bullet point that caught my eye. It told me to write down the name of the person who was bullying me and their birthday onto a piece of paper, folded in eighths with a piece of their hair, and let it flow down the river down the road. It didn't strike me as odd that there was actually a river down the road. My underdeveloped mind figured everyone lived walking distance from a river. I came home the next day with a few long blonde strands and sent them floating in the proper encasing. When I returned to school the following day, she wasn't in school. It was great, and no one really bothered me. I spent the entire afternoon in peace and on the playground. It wasn't until after the weekend that I found out she'd gone missing. After a week's time, she was found washed up on the riverbank. I was freaked out, and I deleted my Neopets account altogether. In 2 years' time, I was back on the internet, and armed and equipped with a Club Penguin subscription. Around the same time, I was in my first relationship at the start of middle school. I found out that my boyfriend of 2 weeks had been cheating on me. I was doing my rounds on Club Penguin when Panda 778 approached me. Again, he started chatting with me, giving me brief sentences on how to cheer myself up. He brought up my boyfriend and told me the same advice that he had first given me. I didn't do it. At first, I promise. I wasn't going to, but when he started telling me the name of the street I lived on after I didn't go through, I felt like I had to, so I did. A week later, she turned up on the riverbank with little to no color in her lifeless body. I deleted my account the next day. I'm about to graduate high school, and there has been years between the day they found her body and now. I had started to come to terms with it when another boy was found on the riverbank. He was in my brother's class, but he didn't seem shaken at all. In fact, I saw my brother in tears from laughing at something he had shared on Facebook yesterday. It was a post shared by someone named Panda. I don't know if this is pure coincidence, but I found that my hairbrush was missing this morning.